But for now, this is how we think about these cells and their role in the immune system. So what I want to do is to give a short overview of the role of CD4 T cells in the immune response. Some of this will be repetition of what you heard before this morning. And then we will go into the regulatory T cells in health and disease. Specifically, I will discuss Th17 cells and their role in immunity, but also in disease. And lastly, I will tell you a bit about plasticity in the immune system. Now it's really vague, but later on I will hope that this concept will become a bit more clear to you also. So, to start with, we are threatened daily with a lot of different threats which are illustrated here. Some of them are really large, some of them are small, some of them are in the blood, others are in the tissues, some are in the cells, some are outside the cells. And this means that we have to have an immune response which is really ideally suited to target, to deal with these different threats. Each threat needs a specific approach to deal with them. And that's indeed how our immune system has different arms to combat these different threats optimally. Very crucial in directing which response is needed, the B-cell response or cytotoxic T-cell response for viruses, for example, that is determined by the helper T-cell compartment. So CD4 T-cells really direct which response is going to happen and which one is really ideally suited to deal with these specific targets. So CD4 T cells can be regarded as master regulators of the immune system. They do this by secreting cytokines, and cytokines, that is really the language which is used by your immune system to communicate between different cells. So different immune cells produce different cytokines, and different cells can receive these signals by expressing the specific receptor for these specific cytokines. When a cytokine binds to its specific receptor on another target cell, this will induce changes in the gene expression in the target cell, and this will adapt the response of this cell to what is needed. What you already heard before this morning is also that we can recognize CD4 T cells which are specifically suited to produce interferon gamma or IL-4, and this will direct a different response. So this response is adapted to what we need at that moment via production of different cytokines. So here you see an naive cell, a naive T cell, and it needs a couple of signals to get activated. What does it need? Do you remember? T cell to get activated? What signals do you need? T cell receptor trigger. It needs to recognize an antigen which is presented by an MHC molecule on an antigen-presented cell, and it needs co-stimulation. And then this cell will get activated, but depending on cytokines and the environment, it will go into a different direction. And the cytokines which are present are determined by the kind of infection that is in your body. So for example, if there is an intracellular bacterium, your antigen-presenting cell will produce a lot of IL-12. It presents the antigen, the T cell, the naive T cell gets activated, and it will go into the direction of the Th1 cell, which is ideally suited to combat these intracellular bacteria. These different T cell subsets, we know the Th1 and Th2 cell for now, I think, 25 years. At that moment, everything was put into Th1 or Th2. It was a two-way immune response, which was thought to be always suited to deal with all the infection. But later on, also other cells appeared, like Th17 cells and also the regulatory T cells. What is different between these cell types is that indeed they are induced under different circumstances, different milieu. They produce different effector cytokines, they express different chemokine receptors, and crucially, they also express express a different transcription factor. So, and it's thought that this transcription factor drives the expression of these chemokine receptors and cytokines in this specific cell. So this you also saw before. So the Th1 cells direct towards the cellular immune response. They help macrophages to kill the intracellular bacteria, for example, which they have taken up. They help B cells to switch to an isotype, to a plasma cell which produces specific kind of isotypes of antibody which can optimally bind, complement, and opsonize the bacteria. They can also enhance inflammation by attracting neutrophils and inducing pro-inflammatory cytokine production. But here is something missing. That is also part of the Th1 response, which is not depicted here. What do we miss here? So it's a response which you need against intracellular pathogens. What do we need to combat viruses, for example? Yeah, the cytotoxic T cells, so that's still missing here. So Th1 cell response characterized by interferon gamma, especially TNF. You need it for the activation of macrophages, for example, but also for the activation of cytotoxic T cells that they can kill the infected target cell, and for the production of opsonizing and complement fixed antibodies. That's mainly IgG antibodies, which belong to this Th1 response. And you need it for defense against viruses and other intracellular pathogens. The Th2 cells direct towards a humoral immune response. The main cytokines in this response are IL-4, IL-5, IL-13. Here is depicted what they do. IL-4 can cause an isotype switching in the B cell to produce IgE antibodies, which you need for combating, for example, large parasitic infections like fungi or something. They are really large. You can't eat them. Macrophages can't eat them, so you need antibodies which bind these pathogens, and then mast cells will be activated to release their granules, and this will kill parasitic infection, the parasite. And in addition, Th2 cells can activate eosinophils. So this was really the concept up to, I think, 5 years ago. So we had Th1 cells and Th2 cells, and they could do everything. Everything fitted into Th1 and Th2. However, more recently, it became much more complicated. And one subset which has been studied already pretty extensively by now is the Th17 cell, and even longer the regulatory T cell. And this is really the topic of this lecture. So how are these cells induced, and what is their role in the immune response? So first of all, regulatory T cells. The immune system really has a difficult job, because you can imagine there is an infection, you need to combat this infection, but you should not attack your own tissues. So there should be a real good discern between foreign materials, foreign threats, and to self-tissue, self-antigens. So you need immunity to defend yourself against invaders, but you don't want to have tissue damage. So this means that we have to regulate our immune response properly. And this is mainly attributable to the regulatory T cell. So this cell determines the quality of the immune response, but also the quantity, so how strong your response needs to be. A regulatory T cell can suppress a lot of different cells. It can suppress other CD4 T cells or CD8 T cells, but it can also suppress dendritic cells and NK cells, NKT cells, B cells, antibody production. So it's really a cell which can regulate a lot of different responses. And suppression means that it can suppress the activation but also the proliferation of these cells and the effective functions such as cytokine production. So it can really dampen the immune response. If immunity means that when a foreign antigen enters your body, this will be taken to your draining lymph nodes, and here immune cells, CD4 T cells, constantly migrate to these lymph nodes and try to recognize the antigen with a T cell receptor. If there is a T cell, an naive T cell, which can recognize this foreign antigen, it will get activated and it will start proliferation. Necessary because you need, of course, a small army to combat this infection, and this specificity is only rarely available at moment 0, so you need expansion of this specific clone to deal with this infection. But you only want to happen, for this to happen, if there is a foreign antigen. If it's a self-antigen, you don't want a response. Therefore, your T cells are educated. This education happens in the thymus. So when a T cell in the thymus recognizes a self-antigen with relatively high affinity, this clone of T cell will be deleted. And that's the main reason that we don't, as we sit here, develop all of us autoimmune responses. So the dangerous clones are deleted by central tolerance. Central means in the thymus, where the T cells are educated. However, this process is not completely sufficient. So some T cells will escape this mechanism and come into the bloodstream in the periphery. And therefore, you need additional mechanisms to keep these cells in check in your bloodstream. And a very important cell to do this is the regulatory T cell. So this means that regulatory T cells play a very important role in maintaining peripheral tolerance. So keeping cells with potential reactivity to self-antigens in check. Therefore, they have a role in preventing autoimmune diseases. And they can also limit chronic inflammatory diseases. But of course, they can also block beneficial responses. They can also limit the response, for example, to tumors. They can also limit the response against pathogens, which you really need to combat these pathogens. So we think they are primary mediators of peripheral tolerance, but if they function too well, if they have too good suppression, it can also interfere with your normal responses. If something's not clear, or if I'm going too fast, please interrupt me. We can recognize then different sorts of regulatory T cells. We have the ones which come from the thymus. These are the natural Tregs, and we also have regulatory T cells which differentiate from a naive T cell. And there we can recognize the IL-10 producing TL1 cells, TGF-beta producing TG3 cells, and the inducible FOXP3 positive Treg. But this one resembles a lot the one which coming from the thymus, but it's not the same. So in this way we have different sorts of CD4 T cells with regulatory properties. They differ, of course, in their origin. Some are really originated from the thymus and others are induced in the periphery. They differ in the genetic signature which they have and the mechanisms that they use to suppress immune responses. So these are the natural Tregs and these are the induced, adapted, or converted Tregs. If we have a closer look at what happens in the thymus, I will focus mostly in this presentation on the natural Treg, so the FOXP3 positive natural Treg which is coming from the thymus. This is the situation in the thymus. We have different T cells with different T cell receptors, and here you see the MHC on the antigen presenting cell, which presents the self-antigen. The red arrow indicates strength of interaction with the antigen and MHC, and when there is no interaction, the T cell will die by neglect. If there is a too strong interaction, there is a negative selection because T cells are really dangerous to have in the periphery. And only cells with low affinity here for the MHC antigen will be positively selected. They will develop further, and some of them will enter the periphery to defend our body against infections. But cells with intermediate affinity for self will be selected to become regulatory T cells in the thymus. So these natural regulatory T cells have a relatively high affinity for self antigens. And that's also why people believe that these are especially equipped to prevent responses to self antigens. Okay. So if we look at the timeline of Treg discovery, it goes back a long time. In 1969, 1970, there was already some indication that there should be a cell coming from the thymus which is able to suppress immune responses. In that time, they also called these cells suppressor T cells. But what was the case? Here this first experiment. The blue boxes are mice data experiments. But what they saw is when you remove the thymus at day 3 from a mouse, this mouse will develop a lot of different autoimmune phenomena. So it will start attacking on tissues. And this could be prevented when you added normal T cells, CD4 T cells from another mouse. Then you could prevent this autoimmune response. So this led people to think that there was a T cell coming from the thymus which could suppress immune response to that cell. So you see in the beginning it was mainly T cell data coming from the mouse model, and later on, only in 2000, it was discovered that there is also regulatory T cell in the human system which is able to suppress other immune responses. First of all, it was found that FOXP3 is really a critical marker for a regulatory T cell. Later on, people identified CD25 as a very important molecule which could be used to recognize the regulatory T cell. But in human beings, that is very complicated because also activated T cells will express CD25. So it was not a really nice marker to see your regulatory T cell. So people have done a lot of research to find new markers which were exclusively present on the regulatory T cell. And later on, in 2006, CD127 was identified as a suitable marker on the cell surface that was really convenient instead of FOXP3, which is really in the cell, and which could be used as a marker for regulatory T cell. So FOXP3, that is really the master regulator of the anti-Reg cell. It is a transcription factor which controls expression of a lot of genes which are necessary to mediate this regulatory activity of the cell. People found in IPEX, that is a very rare condition, there is the FOXP3 gene mutated. So there's mutation in the FOXP3 gene, and this resulted in a dysregulated immune system. So these people had a lot of different autoimmune manifestations, and this was due to the absence of the natural Treg population. People with IPEX don't get old. Also in mice, comparable disease was identified, and that is scurvy. So also in scurvy mouse, there is a mutation in the FOXP3 gene, which leads to absence of natural Treg cells, and these mice develop a lot of different organ-specific specific autoimmune diseases like type 1 diabetes and inflammatory bowel disease. And this was due to hyperreactivity, hyperactivation of the CD4 T cell population due to absence of the anti-RAG cell. FOXP3 was therefore found to be important in the development of the Tregs, also the maintenance, but certainly also for the function of the Treg. Well, in mouse cells it's very simple. So if you express FOXP3 in an Eve T cell, this T cell will get the phenotype and function of a regulatory T cell. However, in human cells this is not the case. So it appears to be that FOXP3 expression is required for the regulatory function. It will set the cell in a certain genetic mode, but it's not sufficient for regulatory function in the human system. So, as I said before, people did a lot of effort to characterize this Treg cell in more detail because it's convenient, of course, to follow these cells in certain diseases and also see the effect of certain therapies, for example. And moreover, so these molecules can serve as a biomarker or marker of Tregs, but you can also learn something about how these cells function. CD25 expression I already explained to you. So that is the alpha receptor chain of the IL-2 receptor. IL-2 is a very critical survival factor and growth factor for T cells. And these regulatory T cells express all the time the high affinity IL-2 receptor. So they are very efficient in consuming IL-2 from the surrounding. What they also express is, of course, a T cell receptor. And it's clear that also Treg needs to be activated to do its job. And this goes, of course, via the recognition of an antigen, probably a self-antigen, presented on the MHC molecule. And this leads then to the activation of the Treg. There have been a lot of studies performed to investigate how regulatory T cells can then suppress other immune cells, and in this case other affected T cells. A lot of different mechanisms have been proposed. It's not clear whether different subsets use different methods or that the method which is used is dependent on the environment or the cytokine environment. But what has been proposed is that regulatory T cells can produce different regulatory cytokines like IL-10, TGF-beta. These cytokines bind then to the receptor on affected T cells and can really dampen the effector response of the cell. So this is a cytokine contact-independent mechanism of suppression. Another proposed mechanism is the production and release of cytotoxic molecules, like NK cells do, for example. So, release of coenzyme A and B and perforin, which can cause the death of the effector cell. But this is also, of course, a very efficient way to down-regulate immune responses. Still another way is to interfere with metabolic needs of the effector cell. So, for example, as I told you before, IL-2 is a very important cytokine, very important survival factor and growth factor for T cells. This regulatory T cell expresses the high affinity IL-2 receptor all the time, and it's very good in competing for IL-2 with the effector cell. So it takes away all the IL-2 in the environment, and this will deplete the effector cell from this cytokine, and this will also cause the death of the cell. And there are still other ways in which by metabolic disruption this Treg can interfere with T cell response. And the last mechanism which has been proposed is the contact-dependent suppression. So in this suppression, the regulatory T cell interacts with the antigen-presenting cell, in this case DC. it can bind CD80 and CD86 via CTLA4, which is present on the Treg, and in this way it can make the DC more tolerogenic. So this DC is not able anymore to really efficiently present antigen and co-stimulation to the effector T cell, and there will be no response of the effector T cell. So these mechanisms have all been proposed. They have also been confirmed, especially in mouse models. But what is really the case in the human system and whether these mechanisms are combined, that's not really clear at the moment. Well, you can of course measure Treg numbers and frequency by markers, which I discussed earlier, FOXP3 for example, or expression CD25 and CD127. But what's more reliable and more nice to study is really how good these cells do their job. And you can do that in the lab. So you start with blood from a patient or from a control, which you want to study the Treg function in. You isolate the white blood cells by means of Vicol gradients. So here your white blood cells will appear on top of the Vicol. You can isolate them, label them with antibodies, and then back sort them. So by flow cytometry, I don't really know whether this technique is familiar. Okay. Then yeah, you get these kinds of pictures. So this is a T cell stained for 127 and 25, and here you can identify that you see 25 high cells which have a low expression from 27. These are your Tregs, and you can ask the machine to sort them in a separate tube. In addition, you sort cells which we call the responder cells. They are 25 negative, CD4 positive cells, and subsequently we stain these cells with the dye, CVZ, fluorescent dye, which enables us to follow proliferation later on. Then we put them together in a 96-well plate in different combinations, so in different ratios. So responder cells alone, or in combinations with an increasing amount of regulatory T cells. And we stimulate these cells with anti-CD3. And this is a method to activate both responder cells and the regulatory T cells.
Sorry, I forget what does Treg stand for?
Responder T cells. So the cells which we are which we use to read out what happens. Yeah?
Earlier you said that CD127, that the marker is for the T regulatory cell, but now I see it's negative? Is that
so it's indeed the marker, but the idea is that it's lower on the regulatory T cell.
Okay.
Yeah, as compared to other cells.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. If you stain these cells, this population for FOXP3, you will find them more than 90% positive for FOXP3. So this is indeed the same population, but you can't sort on FOXP3 because then you have to permeabilize the cell, and then it's not usable for these kinds of assays. So you culture them together, different combinations, different ratios, and then we will fax them again after 3 to 5 days. We will date on the living cells, which are CD4 positive, and here you can see a very characteristic CVZ plots. So that's the fluorescent dye, which we use to label the responder cells with. Which is really characteristic for this dye is that it has a certain fluorescence intensity, depicted here, for example. And when the cell divides, it will divide its CVZ content over the daughter cells. So you get a peak pattern on a logarithmic scale. These cells didn't divide, these cells divided once, these cells divided twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. So you can really follow the division of cells in time, not in time, at a certain moment. And you can calculate then the fraction of the cells which has proliferated. And this is when you culture responder cells alone, so in the absence of Tregs. When you add Tregs, proliferation left. So these cells can really inhibit proliferation of the responder cells. Clear? This Treg function, this function, if it doesn't suppresses other responses as it should, can result in different pathologies. It can result, of course, in reactivity against cell tissues which you don't want, autoimmune disease. It can result in the response against harmless substances from the environment, which appears an allergy. And it can also result in the rejection of, if it's Tregs function not as well as they should, you can also have allograft rejection. So new organs will be rejected because you get an immune response to these allografts if Tregs don't do their job really good. And you can also, of course, if Tregs don't function too well, if they function too well, you can get cancer, for example. You don't get the response you need to combat tumor cells. So this function means that you can have a Treg which doesn't do its job. It doesn't suppress as much as it should be, as it should do, and then you get that can result in autoimmunity and allergy. But if the Treg functions too well, this can result in allogeneic rejection and cancer. Here in Diepenbeek, years ago we studied also the regulatory T cells in multiple sclerosis. That's an autoimmune disease of the central nervous system, in which you get a T cell attack of your myelin sheet. And this will result in autoimmune phenomena, which you see in multiple sclerosis. So a colleague of mine studied these regulatory T cells in MS. He studied them also in controls. And here you see on the right x-axis the different ratios of responder cells to regulatory T cells. And you can see that there is a dose-dependent suppression of proliferation. On the y-axis you see the suppression. So the more Tregs are present in the co-culture, the more suppression of responding T cell proliferation, as measured with the method I described before. In relapsing remitting MS patients, in the earlier stage of their disease, you can find also suppression of regulatory T cells, but this is lower than what you can see in healthy controls. So Tregs appear to have a dysfunction. They suppress less well as the Tregs of controls. And then, surprisingly, later on, another stage of the disease, secondary progressive disease, that's, a lot of the relapsing remitting patients will develop this disease. It's not a pathology, actually. You can see that their regulatory T cell function has returned to normal. So that led us to hypothesize that this Treg dysfunction may contribute to the pathology of MS. This is another illustration of the same data. So here you see the suppression which is observed in the 1-to-1 ratio. That varies in wild controls from 60 to 90%, but you can see a very large spread in untreated MS patients. Some patients have Tregs which don't suppress at all, and some patients have Tregs which have normal suppression. But overall, untreated MS patients have a decreased suppressive capacity of the Tregs. If you treat these patients with interferon beta, that's a lot of MS patients will receive interferon beta as a treatment. This does not improve anything. So you can also use this method to see the efficacy of different therapies to interfere or to restore the Treg suppressive capacity. So the idea is that you have effector cells. They will be regulated by regulatory T cells. This will prevent autoimmune disease to develop. However, if you have inadequate numbers of Treg cells, if they are not sufficient to regulate this response, you do get autoimmunity. Or if they are with sufficient numbers, but they don't do their job, as I showed you before in MS, you will develop autoimmunity. Or if there is nothing wrong with the function of these Treg cells, but the effector cells are not really sensitive to this mechanism of action, you also will end up with autoimmunity. So it's not only Treg dysfunction which can be disturbed, but it can also be the numbers or resistance of effector cells. And this indeed has been studied in a lot of different autoimmune diseases in the human being. And here you can see that in most cases there is nothing wrong with the number of Tregs. Sometimes they are indeed decreased or even increased. But in all cases you see that Treg function is decreased. And in some cases they also find an increased resistance of effector T cell. So these are three levels you can have that your Treg population is not able to suppress effector T cell responses to self-antigens. So then, of course, it is very attractive to target these regulatory T cells, but because we have as shown before in this picture that there is, in a lot of cases, something wrong, or in numbers, or in the function of the regulatory T cells. So it's attractive to think that when you target these cells with immunotherapy, that you can cure or prevent autoimmune responses. And people are working with this. There are different approaches which you can use. You can, of course, try to inject something in vivo which activates or expands the regulatory T cells in general. This would then lead to more regulation in your system, but it can also, of course, block responses which you do need, for example, the anti-tumor response or the infections, the response to infections. So dangerous. But there are also different approaches to retrieve regulatory T cells from the blood, for example, expand them in ex vivo, and then infuse them back again. So then you do it out of the body expansion of the regulatory T cell and then give it back. And still another approach is to isolate just naive T cells, and with a certain cytokine cocktail induce therapeutic Treg cells, which you can then give back into the patient. So there are different approaches to increase your Treg number in the human body and then try to combat the reactivity which you have against self tissues. In this last part, you see depletion of Tregs. That's of course not very convenient in autoimmunities, but where do you want to deplete Tregs to have a better response? In what cases, in what disease?
It's already done.
Yeah, indeed, there. So for cancer, for example, if you need a response which is really suppressed by regulatory T cells, then you would like to deplete your Treg cells to have this response that it can cure. What is the drawback of interfering with your Treg system? Do you have any idea? In these cases, if you expand or activate your Tregs in general, it will lead to general immunosuppression, of course. It's not specific for the thing you want. So then you suppress all responses in the body. That will be dangerous because this can lead to development of cancer, for example, or diminished defense against infections. So that's not really a thing we want to achieve in treating autoimmune disease. And therefore, it's more attractive to generate regulatory T cells which have a certain reactivity. They recognize a certain antigen, so that they are not a general immunosuppressive, but they are just activated by this specific antigen and then can do a very specific immunosuppression. So this is indeed the field in which a lot of research and clinical trials are going on at the moment. So a lot of data is coming from that in from upcoming years. So that will learn us more about the feasibility of this approach. T17 T17 cells then. A separate T cell lineage. So when we speak of different lineage, that's very complex. But people say that you should have a really specific transcription factor for a lineage, and it should have specific effector cytokines which have a different specific function in the body. And that is indeed the case for Th17 cells. So the cells arise also from naive T cells. They get activated on the antigen-presenting cell. They recognize the antigen, and if there is IL-6 and TGF-beta in the environment, this naive cell will develop in a Th17 cell. It will express raw gamma-3, that's the transcription factor of a Th17 cell, and it will start producing the cytokines IL-17A, F, IL-22, CCL20, GM-CSF. So these are really the cytokines which belong to the Th17 cell. And other cytokines which are important for the generation of these cells is IL-23 here and IL-21. So during differentiation IL-6 and TGF-beta, the combination of these two will direct the cell in the Th17 direction. These cells are mainly found at mucosal tissues, so at the barrier surfaces like the lungs and the airways, the gut. There you can find a lot of Th17 cells. IL-17 is a cytokine family consisting of 6 different cytokines. Most important in respect to T cell Th17 cells is IL-17A and F. They can form homodimers or heterodimers, and as such bind to their receptor target cells, which is composed also of 2 subunits, IL-17 receptor A and C. When these molecules bind to their receptor, this leads to an intracellular signaling cascade resulting in activation of transcription factors, amongst others NF-kappa B, which is a really pro-inflammatory transcription factor. So if you have these activated Th17 cells, they will have their effects on endothelial cells, epithelial cells, neutrophils, macrophages, fibroblasts, and the outcome is that it's really pro-inflammatory, so it promotes inflammation, and this response appears to be very important to combat extracellular pathogens like Candida albicans, Staphylococcus aureus. These kind of infections are really dealt with the Th17 response. So to complicate it a bit further, here you have antigen-presenting cells, cytokines which drive Th17 differentiation. So indeed, T cells will go into the Th17 direction, but there are a lot of different other cells like CD8 T cells, NKT cells, innate immune cells, and non-immune cells, which can also produce this IL-17A and F. This has effects on also immune cells like macrophages, but also non-immune cells. And it leads to the production of pro-inflammatory cytokines in these target cells, and also to the expression of, for example, antimicrobial peptides by epithelial cells. And that's, of course, important in these barrier surfaces to prevent that you get infected with a pathogen. So, also very important in recruiting neutrophils. And because of all these effects and all these, it's very strong response, you also get tissue destruction, and in tumors it can also contribute to vascularization of the tumor. But important for the host protection against fungi, bacteria, extracellular pathogens. But if not properly regulated, this is a very dangerous response, and it has been shown to contribute to different autoimmune pathologies like rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, inflammatory bowel disease, and so on. In multiple sclerosis, again, these cells have been demonstrated to play an important role. In the animal model of MS, the mice model, experimental driving the inflammation in this model. So before, people thought it was a Th1 disease, and what they did is then knock out interferon gamma, because that's the really most important Th1 cytokine. But what they found then, strikingly, was that the disease got worse. So you couldn't prevent disease by knocking out interferon gamma. So that was really strange, because in that time, if it's a Th1 disease, you expect, if you knock out interferon gamma, that the disease is mild. And later on, it was found indeed that it's not, it's more a Th17 disease. And if you knock out interferon gamma, you take away the brake of IL-17 production. So interferon gamma can suppress Th17 responses. So if you take away interferon gamma, Th17 response can get worse and pathology gets worse. In MS, then, there's also some indication that IL-17 is importantly involved in the disease. So you can find expression in both in the plaque, so in the brain of the MS patients, and in fluid, in the cerebrospinal fluid. And you can also see that the expression of IL-17 correlates with the severity of MS, and cells which are responsive for the attack, which are reactive against myelin peptides, they produce IL-17 in MS patients. So these are indications that maybe MS is also mainly driven by Th17 cells. How could these cells then contribute to pathology? Well, in MS, you need, the attack is going on in the central nervous system. So the cells need to go from the blood into the central nervous system. And that happens actually at the blood-brain barrier. Recently, it was shown that IL-17 produced by Th17 cells can result in reactive oxygen species. So, and this ROS can then activate the endothelial cells and result in blood-brain barrier disruption. So these endothelial cells don't close that well anymore, and enables other immune cells to enter then the central nervous system. And people think that this is a very crucial event. So the disruption of the blood-brain barrier, allowing other immune cells to enter the central nervous system where they would not come in a normal situation. And more recently, in also the animal model again, people showed that these Th17 cells might make contact with neurons directly and cause them to die. So the research is still going on in this field, but there are some indications that Th17 cells are really contributing to the clinical symptoms which you see in MS. Then people thought, well, if this molecule is so important for autoimmune responses, if this is really the pathogenic cell, you could try to interfere with this cell by blocking, for example, the IL-17A, so affect the molecule of the Th17 cells. Therefore, a humanized antibody was developed, and it was used in different trials. A trial with psoriasis, rheumatoid arthritis, and uveitis. And these patients were given a single shot of this antibody intravenously, so in the bloodstream, and then patients were followed up during 6 or 16 weeks. In all cases, you can see that there was a really substantial improvement in RA already within 1 week. In psoriasis, almost 3/4 of all antibody-treated patients showed improvement, and also in uveitis, it appeared to be very effective. Last part of the talk, T-cell plasticity. So, hematopoietic cells, like lymphocytes, can, as I told you, develop into distinct affected types, subpopulations with different functions. So, for example, Th1 versus Th2 versus Treg versus Th17. However, there is now evidence that this these subsets are not fixed as they are, but they can switch again between a different phenotype obtaining a different function. And that is called plasticity, so the flexibility of the phenotype and function. And this is really a new concept, so yeah, it also complicates immunology much more. But in innate cells, this was shown that macrophages, mast cells, neutrophils can still change their phenotype and function. But also in the adaptive immune system, this is the case. So T cells can change their phenotype and function under different conditions. Then the question is, why do we need this flexibility? Why don't we get a fixed cell with a certain phenotype which is really equipped to do the job? Well, there are different reasons people believe. What I told you in the beginning, we encounter a lot of different threats which need a specific tackle, and therefore we need multiple effective pathways to deal with all these different threats. Secondly, an immune response is going in phases. In the beginning, you need the development of the response, then you have the effective phase, and then it needs to dampen again. And in the beginning, you need an immune response to deal with the pathogen, but later on you may need repair programs to repair also the tissue damage which has occurred during this response. So that's another reason why we might need flexibility. And the last reason is that as we get older, our thymus, which produces new T cells, shrinks. It can't come up with demand anymore. So de novo responses may get limited with increasing age. And it would then be convenient, of course, if effector memory T cell responses would have some degree of flexibility and deal with these new responses. So these are the reasons why we think that we might need flexibility in the immune system. Well, I told you before that different cytokines can lead to the differentiation of different subsets, but now it's also clear that cytokines are also important in the switch between subsets. So it has been shown that Th2 cells can go into the Th1, can become again a Th1 cell if there is a lot of IL-12 in the environment. Th17 cell can become a Th1 cell again if there is IL-12 in the environment. And the Treg, a useful Treg, can become a Th17 cell under the influence of IL-6, and this is of course a very dangerous switch. And here you go from an effector cell to another effector cell subtype, but here you can go from a regulatory T cell into an effector T cell, which can really contribute to immune responses. People also think that this flexibility that is regulated at the epigenetic level. Are you familiar with epigenetics? Yeah. So these are not changes in your DNA, but these are changes in the way this DNA, the histones and CpG motifs are modified. So this alters accessibility of certain regions for such factors. And this has been studied for the FOXP3 gene, for example, in regulatory T cells. So here you see these three regions which undergo different epigenetic modifications. Here in the top panel you see conventional T cells. In the middle panel you see induced regulatory T cells. Here at the bottom you see the natural, stable FOXP3 regulatory T cells. And what is clear is that at these three sites in the promoter region, methylation and histone modification is completely different between these three subsets. And this results in absence of FOXP3 expression, so it's not accessible to transcription factors in the first case in the conventional T cells. It is accessible, but to a lower degree as in the really stable Treg cells. So this, induced Treg population, there is an unstable FOXP3 expression. And this means that this Treg phenotype is not stable. So due to epigenetic regulation, we can have different outcome in different cells of a certain program. And this enables flexibility in the cell. So for Tregs, of course, this has consequences. So a substantial part of the cells has a transient or unstable FOXP3 expression because of the mechanism I showed you before. And these cells can lose their FOXP3 expression and then are called ex-FOXP3 T cells. And much worse, they don't have this regulatory phenotype and function anymore, but they start producing T cell cytokines which have really effective functions. So they will develop themselves into the activated memory T cell. When you transfer these ex-FOXP3 cells into a mouse, then this mouse, these cells contribute to the onset of diabetes. So they don't prevent this like Tregs do, but they now contribute to pathology. And they are also found in inflamed tissues. These ex-FOXP3 cells can develop both natural and adaptive Tregs, so it complicates all matters a bit more. This has also consequences for Treg-based therapies because we have seen before there are a lot of different Treg populations. Which one should you use? Do they have a different function, or do they have overlapping functions? And more importantly, are they stable in vivo? You don't want to treat autoimmune patients with a Treg which you induced in vitro and then this Treg will become an effector cell. Then, yeah, it doesn't help the patient. So for using them in clinic, we need to unresolve different issues still. For example, which Treg cell subset controls which type of immune response, which factors determine which Treg you get, and how can we be sure of the phenotype and stability of the Treg if you use it for therapy. So these things need to be resolved before you can even think of using these kinds of immune interventions as therapy. Brings me to the conclusion of this lecture. So I tried to show you that regulatory T cells are very important in your immune system, and amongst others to keep peripheral tolerance so that you won't react against self-tissues, so that we don't all get autoimmune disease. Th17 cells is a relatively new subset of T cells which has pro-inflammatory capacities. They are needed for a normal physiological response against extracellular pathogens, but they are also found in a lot of autoimmune diseases and other pathologies to be critically involved in pathology. To help us cell lineages, we try to put every T cell in a box, but perhaps it appears to be more complicated. So T cells can also switch from one subtype to another. So they are not as stable as originally thought. New T cell subsets and T cell plasticity complicate our understanding of the immune system, and this will lead to new insights, certainly in the upcoming years, I think. And importantly, if you interfere with effector or regulatory mechanisms to treat diseases, you should know what you are doing. And it's all a kind of balance. So pro-inflammatory and regulatory functions need to be balanced